Okay, so here we are. I've pulled my palette together that I'm going to be working with. Let me move that aside just a bit so that you can see that I am working on a piece of felted wool. Now this is just a rough 8 by 8 inch square. It is some beautiful wool that I got from, I believe, the Pendleton Mill. You can go to their outlet store and you can get offcuts and leftovers and all kinds of fun things that I discovered. And so I ordered quite a bit, and that's what I'm going to use as the base. Now, if I were doing a wet felted painting, I would use a piece of pre-felt for the base because I would want it to, during the wet felting process, to connect to the fibers that I add on top. With needle felting, I can use pretty much any fabric as a base as long as it's not too sturdy that my needles can't go through it. Now you can use linen, you can use cottons, my favorite thing to use honestly is leftover sweaters and cardigans and leftover wool from taking a pair of wool trousers, men's trousers. You can get some beautiful wool that way. The best score though is when I can find a woman's pleated wool skirt at the thrift store, because you can walk away with anywhere from 4 to 6 yards of wool fabric that you can felt down. So the thrift stores are your friends. You can find, like I said, men's wool trousers, women's wool trousers, although those are harder to come by. You get a little bit more fabric with men's, and honestly, sometimes I think the quality is better for the menswear. You can take a wool coat, a wool suit jacket, but you're going to lose an awful lot of that wool in the cutting out usable flat pieces of, wool fabric. So I recommend trousers, skirts, definitely skirts. If you can find sweaters, Angora, cashmere, wool sweaters, you can certainly use those. I mean, I've got a couple of examples here. This is beautiful because it's a little bit of a stretch wool, but it's got a two-tone fabric, so I can take and I can either make the lighter side be the background or the darker side be the background. Again, this is a jacket that was cut apart, so there are obvious places where the buttonholes are, where the button is, that I'm not going to be able to use, but I can make a couple of coasters out of that. This is the back of a wool sweater that's been felted down. And don't worry about the patterns. If you're using a sweater as your background, you can certainly cover the whole thing up. That's not a problem at all. I like seeing the patterns when I'm doing things like coasters, because this can give you some really nice visual interest. And then of course, there's the felted wool sheets that you can get at the craft and hobby store, and they're okay as a last resort, but by and large, I like using felted wool fabric that I can find at the thrift store. So that's what we're using as the base. Now, I pulled together my palette to use, and I've got in mind kind of a Smoky Mountains kind of landscape here. So I grabbed some deep purples in different shades to use for the mountains. I've got a nice variegated blue and light purple, and even just a touch of a little bit of green in there that I'm going to use for the sky. And then I have a couple of different bats that have got some greens and browns in them, and a little bit left from a roving. Now this piece I want to talk to you about because this was found in this bat here. This is a piece of silk. It's a piece of sari silk. Now, while I could trim this off, and cut off, whoops, lost my light, and cut off the little bits and include it in here, this is not going to needle felt in very well. It would be better used in a wet felted painting because then I can trap these silk fibers that don't felt very well in between wool fibers that will felt nicely. And actually, as I'm looking at it and playing with it more and more, I think this would be beautiful as the center of a flower, the stamen in the center of a flower, and then have these beautiful little tendrils coming out. So that's going to be saved for another purpose. This is what I'm going to use. And, you know, the layout is really quite basic. And I don't say that to mean that it's simple. It's not simple, but it is pretty basic. The first thing you want to figure out is, you know, where your horizon line is. One thing that I've learned is I try not to make things super centered. If you've ever taken a picture or you've looked at pictures, you know that the ones that appeal and that are more visually interesting to you are a little bit offset. So we're going to keep that in mind as we put this together. And so the first thing I'm going to start with is my sky. And I'm just going to take tufts of the wool here, and I'm not going to be too terribly particular about how they come about, because I want to have some visual interest here. And that's why I let things, oh, I got a little bit on my boob. That's why I let things like the white that you see there just sort of come in. See that little sparkle? That was a good thing to find there. And I just, you know, play around with it a little bit. Don't worry if it goes over the edge. I think that that helps you have a more natural looking painting if you're not worried about it coming off the edge, because we can always turn those under. So I'm going to tack this down, and I have my multiple needle tool here, and I just want to tack it down. Just to give a nice little area of basis for my sky. And this is, seriously, it's just like basting. And I may end up using this other multiple needle tool here. I think I want to add just a little bit more of this lightness somewhere. Let's put it right there, that works. Let's use this one. But that gives us a nice sky look, and that's a nice start here. Okay, so once we've got our sky done, and I do have little bits of the fabric showing underneath this, and I'm not worried about that. The color of the fabric works really well with the sky, so I'm just going to let that be. Now, this purple that I grabbed has got some beautiful variegations, and that's why I grabbed it, because I can take and I can use some of those variegations to give us that feel of the Smoky Mountains. Randy and I years ago drove through the Smoky Mountains on our way to and from Savannah, Georgia for my 50th birthday. Gosh, that's been 10 years ago now. And we had to stop so frequently so that we could take pictures. And so this is just sort of me doing that here and giving us some of that interest of those hills in the background. And they really do have a blue and purplish cast to them. Not crazy about that. Maybe this one comes over here, and then this comes up here. I don't know, what do you think? Are we, no, it's too centered. I don't want to have things too centered. We want to have some asymmetry here. I think that'll work. Let's take some more of this bluish purple. Let's see if we can build in some extra layers, because it's all about just layering it in and teasing things out. See what you can get with your layout. And I'm looking to have these different layers in here so that it can look like there are a number of hilly areas that are just sort of overlapping, because it does really look like that. I'm thinking this is okay. I'm liking this. So let's tack these down. And again, you can do this with a single needle. I just have my multiple needle tool handy, and so I wanted to go ahead and just make this happen a little quicker for us by using the multiple needle tool. Okay, so we've got the bases set for our mountains going in there, and now we're gonna move into a little bit of the green. But if I put the green on just right like that, it's gonna be an abrupt shift, and I don't want to have that abrupt of a shift. So I'm gonna pull off a little bit of the green, and then I'm gonna pull off a little bit of the purple. I know you're thinking green and purple, are you kidding, Anna? No, I'm not. I'm really not, because blending these colors together will help us get that transition that we're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to show you something here. I've pulled this out, and this is as long as the fiber is. If I try and blend it with the green fiber that's about twice as long, it's not going to blend very well. So I'm going to cut the green fiber in half. And I'm going to take and then blend 1/2 of it with this purple. Things in the foreground are lighter colored than things in the background, so you always want to work from the darker toward the lighter. And I'm not worried about getting this super cohesively blended. I'm just looking to have a transitional hill that we can have in here that will help us come into the foreground a little bit. And now I'm going to get a little bit more purple and add another one over here on this side. And it's just, finger blending is as easy as this. You know, I'm just pulling the fibers apart, and then I'm, you know, putting them on top of each other and pulling them apart again. So now I'm going to blend this with the green. It really is easy to build up those different layers. And you can, you know, blend, you know, shades. If I wanted to have this spread out here for a mid-range, then I could blend a little bit more green into this and bring it to the forefront. But for right now, I think this is going to work. And let's see. Oh yeah, I like that side. It's always just about playing with your fibers and seeing where they want to live and how they want to line up here. You see how I moved this one forward just a little bit, and I've got this one sort of up just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and tack those down. Now don't worry, I know it looks sort of like, Anna, that green and purple, not sure about that. But let's wait until we get the next layer on. I'm just going to lift this up and move it more toward me so that I can get to this part without really covering over everything. So now I'm going to take some of the green, and I want to make sure that I get some of this lighter green in here and not so much of the sparkle. There's a lot of sparkle in this bat, and so I want to tone it down just a little bit. Lay this one in on top here. And you see how it just transitions? Let's get a little bit more of this green here. Oh, this is going to work perfectly for this side. tone that down. Darker green here. There we go. Let's just bring that over here. And I just brought this in to tone down the sparkles of this foreground just a bit. And now it's just a matter of getting all of it cohesively felted in. And then I'll show you how we build in the detail of those different layers that we just put in. Remember, when you're needle felting, always follow my 3 rules. Know where your non-stabbing hand is. Use your elbow as it was designed to be used, not your wrist. And always come out of the fiber the same direction you go into the fiber. And if you can follow those 3 rules, then I can guarantee that you'll be successful in your needle felting. You can use your non-dominant hand to needle felt. You just won't be able to probably felt as long, but it can give you a little bit of a break for your dominant hand. Okay, let's take a peek on the back side. This is how you know if you're getting a good felting going. And you can see we've got tufts of the color coming through really nicely. What I want to do is just do a single pass on this back side to sort of lock these fibers into place. It just helps connect them a little bit more securely to the fabric at the base. And it's important that we are able to have this painting stay put without having to worry about it being able to be pulled off of the surface. And that's why we're sort of locking it in place here. I'm going to flip it over again. Okay, now I'm going to be using a single needle because I want to build in some ridge details here. And I'm going to have it going sideways to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. I want to build in these areas that are edges. And so what I'm doing is just using the needle to go in almost a 45-degree angle to sort of bring in that ridge detail there. And we'll work this from, different directions just to get that ridge detail in. And I'm just working it, dragging it almost along the edge there. And then let's grab this one here. Actually, this one goes over this way. So let's pull this in from here. And it's just about finding that line where that detail edge is and pulling it up, making that pop out. And the more you stab in one area, the more you're going to notice it receding into the background. So after we build in these ridges, we're going to start working on the background and getting it to give us that layered look. Just working all along the edges here. Living right in here, I think. And sometimes it's not so much where the fiber was laid out, but where the color is going. And just following an edge that seems to bring itself into the foreground. Green in there. Let's play around with how you've got it laid out and from what angle you're going to go after it. Sometimes you'll find that one direction works better than another, so don't be afraid to move your painting around just to see where you can come in and make those changes. But that just in itself gives us an awful lot of texture and coming down and bringing in the details. So I'm going to use the multiple needle tool here, and I'm going to push that sky very much into the background just by working the needle in just the sky area, and that will further see just the difference. I'm going to do half of it and show it to you. Remember, the more you work the needle into your project, the more it's going to recede. Okay, so can you see how this side has gone to the background even more, and this side we need to do a little more work? That is just all the result of using the needles to get that sky to just be that big, beautiful, all-encompassing sky that's in the background. It's there, we can see it, but it's in the background. It's up high over our head, and it's certainly not as close as the mountains are. And now let's take a look at the back side. You can see that we're getting even more of a shadowing going here. That's how you know that you're getting your painting where it needs to be, or your project where it needs to be. When you can see almost a shadow image of it on the background, you know that you're doing a good job. So now I'm going to come in with my finer needle, and I want to work this background edges of the mountain even further into the background just by working the needle over this mountain. And then after I've worked the needle, then I'm going to come in and go over those edges again, because the background needs to be in the background. If everything is highlighted, then there's not a lot of visual interest. But if we put some of these mountains into the background, it's going to make the painting just sort of come alive a little bit more. And I just like to work a grid pattern over the edge of where I'm working so that I make sure that I've gotten every bit of the color in that area covered with the needle. Right, now I'm going to come in and I'm just going to work those edges again. You want to start out when you're working on a project like this with your rougher needles, and then gradually go toward your finer needles. this area here. And sometimes when you've got some mid-range like we do with the mountains here, it's just enough to simply work in those darker areas and come in from behind by working the edges. That's one of the nice things about doing this blend, is that I can take and I can push those darker areas into the background, and it brings some texture into the painting. I let the green just sort of stay more up toward the top, and I push the purple back into the background, and that gives us some nice detail and some nice ridge feel. And I'm going to do the same for this one here in the midground, because I've got a couple of areas that are just kind of ripe for building in that little bit of detail there and building in some texture. And I just let the colors tell me by, you know, the darker ones telling me, okay, you're the shadows. You're the guys that need to go into the background. The lighter areas stay in the foreground. And that builds in some ridges and some detail. I've got a little bit of detail here to put in. Just a little bit of the purple coming out, and we'll let it walk into those little lines that seem to be waiting. And then let's work here as well. And this is where you can get some continuity and some overlap from one to another, especially when you've done some color blending like we've done with this. Okay, and now we want to take and build in this ridge here along the green. And again, looking at where the colors lined up and picking out some ridge detail here. And that way it doesn't look so flat. What do you think? I am going to take this as a base. I like the shading that we've got here. I'm going to just trim off these extra little bits of fiber. I know there are some fiber folks that say, oh my gosh, you can't cut the fibers. Well, you know what? I've heard from more than one, actually I've heard from all of my felt inspirations that, you know what, it's okay to cut the fiber if it's too long. And so I have taken their statements at heart, and I have learned to cut the fibers when they are too long, because you can always use the little bits of fibers to help bring some detail in other areas. So even with these little bits that are left over, we could take those and we could come in and give ourselves some little areas of detail by adding them in here if we wanted to. I'm going to play around with it a little bit, but I think that for a base, for maybe some stitching on top of this, I'm happy with where this is. I think we've got a good base for a lovely little fiber painting, a little felted painting, and I'll work the details just a little bit more and add some stitching to sort of bring things out a little bit. Might add a little bit more shading, and maybe that's where some of this little purple bits are going to come in. I might add some shading just to give you that, you know, nightfall. The sun's gone down over the mountains and we've got night coming into play, and just bring in a little bit more shading to make that look like it's night falling, and just play around with it. But that's, in a nutshell, that's a little felt painting, and laying it out and seeing it come about and putting in some details, and I'll add some stitching and show you what I came up with a little bit later. But for today, that's what we've got. If you want to learn more about the classes that I offer through Zoom, or about the Felted Experience, which will be opening in mid-October, head over to stabthingsintoexistence.com and you'll get all the details there. So thanks for being with me today, and I will be back again tomorrow, 10 o'clock Central Time. See y'all later. Bye-bye.